Good evening. Welcome out to a wonderful December Tuesday night. We are here again. Pastor Ford, I'm sure, is loving the weather right now. It is, well, I was going to say raining, but it's snowing. And I'm perfectly cozy. Pastor Ford's freezing. And so he's going to light a fire here in a second and try to warm the place up. And then I'm going to be miserable for the rest of the podcast. So, tonight we're talking about authority. This is going to be fun actually because I was thinking about doing this in somewhat of a like a part two of our confessions from former rebels, but now it's the former rebel talking instead of the
Yeah.
person questioning us and asking us about it. So, talking about the issue of authority, what's your problem with authority? What's your problem with authority? And the truth is, every single person listening to this right now has a deep down natural tendency to resist authority. There's something in us that doesn't like being told what to do. We don't like it when people rule over us, as it were. And so, but seeing this from a biblical perspective is honestly where I have a leg to stand on. This is not, I'm not saying that I'm perfect in this by any stretch, but I can say that God's given me a personal and very deep revelation when it comes to the issue of authority. And it's something that I struggled with for my entire life until I was about 30 something. Where God started actually opening my eyes. I think it probably started when I was in the rehab, but giving me a proper perspective of authority in general. And then I had a genuine breakthrough almost 2 years ago, and so I wanted to talk about this, and it just kind of flowed. I was studying Luke 19 and following the story of Zacchaeus. Jesus brings out this parable, and it's the parable of the 10 servants and 10 minas. And he says that a master leaves to a faraway country. He leaves 10 servants in charge of his goods, and he says he gives them 10 minas each, which is just a sum of money. He hands them this money, and he leaves and basically expects them to produce with this money, to put it to work, right? But directly when he leaves, the Bible says that these men hated their master, and they sent a delegation after him saying, "We don't want this man to rule over us."
Yeah.
And so this story started driving my thinking in this direction. And so there was a couple conversations I've had in the last week or two with different people, and this issue of authority came up again. And so it was like a rolling snowball effect. And I was just picking up thoughts and inspirations and stuff. And then you preached on it Sunday night. And so maybe this is what God wants you to hear. I'm not, maybe this is what we should talk about. But okay, so I have a question for the audience to start. And while you're answering this question, I'm going to ask Pastor Ford a question. And you get to kind of immediately we'll pick up on the comments people make here, but to try and let the comments drive some of the initial part of this conversation. But my question for you is, what is the difference between good and bad authority? It's a very, very simple question. What is the difference between good authority and bad authority? And then, so while you guys are answering that question, you can just throw it out there, and don't feel like, you're not going to get in trouble for answering wrong or right. This is just a matter of bringing out what's already in us. And so bring this stuff out. Let's work through the thoughts. Let's think about it together. And then my question for you is very general. Like what is authority really?
Oh, okay. So good and bad authority was for the audience.
Yeah, that's for the audience.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah. So
Good.
what is for the audience, for the listener, you guys can reply in the chat. What is the difference between good authority and bad authority? And then for you, what is authority? So just like talk really generally, and let's just not go too deep with it.
Okay. So, right. So just talking about authority in general, you mean from a biblical perspective?
Very general. It can be biblical. It can be whatever. I mean,
Well,
yeah,
let's do this. Let's make a rule. The whole reason for us being here is to bring people to an understanding of the Bible.
yes.
So let's just do everything that way from now on. So from now on, when I answer questions, I'm not because you can't really answer what does authority mean to Chinese people. I can't really speak about that. What does authority mean to people who live in a remote island?
Okay, fair enough. So let me. Okay, so yeah, yes. To be honest with you, I kind of just assumed that you would do that. So I'm not going to be like super,
Biblically.
yeah. Tell me what secular authority is. Like, so authority. Where does it start? Where does
Yeah.
authority start?
Okay, so because that's interesting, to me, because the answers will be interesting because the idea of authority, okay, is ordained by God. All authority, the Bible says, is ordained by God. There is no authority that exists that was not ordained by God.
When you say ordained, what do you mean by ordained?
God is the one who put it in place.
Like the idea of authority or the people itself themselves?
See, that's the fun part, is it includes the people as well. And so you think God allowed, horrible people to be placed in authority? Yes, he did. And this is very clear biblically. The children of Israel wanted a king. They asked for a king. God said, "You don't want a king. That's a bad idea, because this is what will happen." And he wasn't. He just said, "This is what will happen when you make somebody king." In other words, this is what happens when people get in authority. This is how they function. And this is what will happen to you if you do not want me as an authority over you. This is what's going to happen. And he's not talking about what bad authority will do. He's talking about what authority will do. Mm-hmm. And so they said, no, we still want a king. And he said, okay, off we go.
Yeah.
And then we have a whole history of king after king after king, some good, some not so good. And it turned out just like God said it would, with these various kings and what they did and how things worked. And, I think it's very, very interesting that the first thing that kings began to do was amass great amounts of wealth. And, which is one of the things that he mentions, because you have authority is authority. I mean, you have power. I remember Elon Musk making the statement, when people, so how does it feel to be the richest man in the world? He said, I'm not the richest man in the world. He said, I know that that's the title that I've been given because of my net worth, or gross worth. But he said that there are all kinds of monarchs around the world, kings, and that are way more wealthy than he is because they control the entire wealth of the nation.
Yeah.
And they are as capable of moving that wealth around as he is his own. So, which is it's a very insightful thing to think about, is that there are people in the world that, they run nations, almost single-handedly.
Yeah.
They've got a group of people that are subordinate to them, but for the most part, they make all the big decisions,
Mm-hmm.
like Elon Musk or any other CEO would do.
So there's a couple answers here that are both the same actually, and I'll read them. I'll read through them, but and then there's another one that's I'll just say them. But bad authority equals self-serving. Good authority equals others' best interest in mind. Good has this is another answer. Good has greater good in mind. Bad puts self first.
Those are not the same things. Those
Okay,
are not the same things.
so what are your thoughts initially on these answers? Those first two
Well, let's go with the first one. You say it again. The authority
equals bad authority equals self-serving. Good authority equals others' best interest in mind.
Okay, so that is not necessarily true. That sounds ideal, but it's not. That that's the kind of thing that somebody would say, not actually having been in a position of authority in the true sense of the term. I'm not talking about, some small thing, but like, for example, if, it's interesting. I'm trying to come up with a scenario, and I can come up with 100 scenarios and at all different levels of how that is incorrect. But, let's do it this way. So you've got a basket, you've got okay. Let me say it this way, because that, it's a one-line text, and being self-serving versus being the interests of others. Let me put it out there this way. There are times where being self-serving is in the interest of others. And the reason why I say that is because when it comes to leadership, Jesus says, smite the shepherd and the sheep will flee. And so avoiding, there's so many, like I said, there's so many things in my mind I want to say all at once. And it's very rare that this is the case. It's usually the other way around, where I'm thinking, okay, I don't know if I want to say this or that, but so many things I want to say at once. But we understand this, like in military, the actual commanding officers don't go into battle. Because if they went into battle, that'd be it. It'd be over. They get killed, it's over. And you have men who are very bold and very brave men who go into the battle, and die. And when they die, the battle's over. It's finished. And you read in the Bible this kind of a thing, where you have people that they go into battle, and they are the kings or whatever, and then the battle turns. Hey, there's the king. Get the king. And and because they know if they hit the king, then it's over, and so that's why I'm saying is, I don't think, and I want to clarify, I don't think the person who wrote that is coming from the perspective of a wrong perspective. The perspective is right, but you have to understand that in leadership, especially when it's mission critical stuff, those lines blur. It's hard to tell the difference between what's in the best interest of the people and what's self-serving, because it can look from the bottom up, it can look self-serving, but from the top down, it's actually self-sacrificing to make this decision. Paul, for example, he says, it's better for me that I would go and be with the Lord, but for your sake, I'm staying here. And so you could look at that and say, oh, see, he's got the best interests of other people in mind. But you could also look at it and say, oh, I see, you don't want to go to be with the Lord because you want to stay here. Yeah. So you're just being self-serving. I mean, you should want to just go be with the Lord and let somebody else, be the leader now. Yeah. So that's what I mean about the lines being blurred, is it's easy. And as a leader, personally, I've experienced this. It's funny because I was in the church in Tucson for 10 years, and I didn't understand a thing about leadership. I was a Bible study leader. I was a band leader. I was a drama team leader. And in all those situations, I didn't understand the point of leadership, because the point of leadership is not simply to make everybody happy. Mm-hmm. The point of leadership is to do the right thing. So that second thing is more accurate. I'm a little nervous, not nervous, but I'm a little bit leery of going full on in the idea of the greater good, because that can become subjective. What is the greater good? And the reason why I say that is because I've heard people make that statement. I'm doing this for the greater good, and that's why I'm doing it. And it's like, no, you're not. You're doing this because you're going to benefit out of this. You're not doing it for the greater good. You're looking at this and thinking, it's the blurred lines thing, like I said, where, you can have somebody who is being self-serving, but claiming to be looking out for the greater good, because if I'm doing well, then everybody will do well. And that's not necessarily the case. I mean, that's the way that, that maybe they would like to think. So again, it's not just cut and dry, but I would say that leadership, the idea of leadership, really needs to be, if you want to have like a rule for leadership, is, in particular, like, because we're talking about in the will of God, is leadership are people who hear from God. Mm-hmm. I mean, at the end of the day, that's all it is they need the leaders. Good leaders are leaders who hear from God, regardless of how that plays out. Regardless of whether it looks self-serving or whether it looks benevolent, doesn't matter. What matters is, can they hear from God? Because if you look at Moses, all the way through, the children of Israel were convinced that Moses was being self-serving
Yeah.
the whole time.
Yeah. Yeah.
But yet God's telling him to do these things, and he's just following orders because he's hearing from God, and God is giving him direction.
Yeah, so it's interesting. I'm going to read this other answer here in a sec. I was hoping more folks would get answers in. The question for the audience, if you guys want to throw in a couple last minute answers here, is what is the difference between good authority and bad authority? And that's for the listener. So you can throw that in the chat section of the in your window. But so what we're seeing though is, like you said, looking from the bottom up.
Uh-huh.
We're seeing the perspective of people who are under authority, and they have a perspective of authority right over them.
Yeah, that's why I mentioned about, for 10 years I thought I knew about authority, and I didn't, because I knew about being placed in a position of authority, but I didn't really understand authority until I actually went out to pastor and started getting my butt kicked. That's when it happens, is when you're the only one and you have no support system around you, and you have to deal with what God wants you to do. It can be very, very difficult. Mm-hmm. And it can look self-serving, and there's nothing you can do about it. You can't change anything, because you have to do it this way, in order to be able to do the will of God. So it's more than just the greater good. It's the will of God. What is God saying? And that is that's very critical.
So here's another answer to the question, and I'll, again, just your thoughts here. Excuse me. All authority is good authority, in as God has given it to those who have it.
Oh, now that's a very insightful idea.
How that authority is wielded, I think, is another question.
That is a very balanced answer. All authority is good because it comes from God. Yes, but how that authority is actually implemented is not, it's not a question of it being good or bad. It just can be tyrannical. It can be, wishy-washy. It could be all over the place.
Yeah.
It could be people-pleasing. Like Saul. So it can take all kinds of forms. But the authority itself is from God, and I think that is. If you don't, I think if I think I can say this safely, is that if you can learn the what we just talked about there about authority, that all authority is good because it comes from God. If we could actually get that revelation, I don't think we really need much more in order to be able to live a successful Christian life. Because this is the thing, the issue of authority, when you don't have that right, it doesn't matter what else you have right, because you won't make it. Because you will only have things right accidentally. You won't have them right on purpose. So it will be this sort of mixed bag. You might have something right, and you're living that out and it's working, but then you'll have other things that you think are right that aren't right, and they're not working, and they will eventually collapse the whole thing. Because understanding authority is the key to everything, because you can't have a relationship with God without understanding authority.
Mm-hmm. So this is an interesting thought then, because when it comes to, and you mentioned this, unfortunately, what you just said is not, it's not just something people pick up, the idea of getting a revelation about authority.
Right.
And so some people have that revelation and some people don't.
Yeah, some people get it by getting clubbed over the head with a 2x4 and finally get it.
Or they
And
just
then-
keep getting
and then-
clubbed over the head with a
Oh,
2x4.
Well, no, and they don't get it. Yeah, that's
don't
the
get
other thing. But then there are other people that they get it because they come at it from the right direction. You know, they have a right heart.
yeah.
They have a humble heart. You know, when you have a prideful heart, and you know, and the truth is, I do believe that we know the state of our hearts. It's just like what the Bible says: the heart is deceitful above all things. And so it's not that we don't know the condition of our hearts, it's that we buy the lies that we tell ourselves. And so when it comes to this issue of authority, the bottom line is, if we would be honest, really where our trouble lies is that we want to be in charge. You know, I preached the other day about that. We just want to be in charge.
Yeah.
You know, that's the problem, is that at the end of the day, down in the core of our being, in our heart of hearts, we want to be in charge. We don't want anybody to be in charge, and we don't want God to be in charge. Mm-hmm. Because if you really wanted God to be in charge, then you would accept anyone and everyone that he puts in authority over you. No matter what they do, no matter how bad they are, you would accept them.
No, you're going too far now. Stop. You're driving way too far.
Okay.
So this is okay. So let me ask this question. You gave it kind of a plain answer, and in the idea of we want to be in charge. But my question is, why would somebody have a problem? What is it about authority that causes an individual to have a problem with authority?
Well, it grows out of. Well, there's pride is always at the base of these kinds of things. But what it is the idea of authority is, if I can't see that you being over me is benefiting me, then I don't want you there.
Oh, so this is a bit reverse to these answers then. So the idea of good authority being in the best interest of others, this is coming from the people who are saying, in a sense, underneath saying, a good authority is somebody who does things for the benefit of.
Yeah. So that's why when the best interest of others, that was one of my first thoughts, is it really depends on others.
Yeah, exactly, because you're in others.
Yeah, you're part of others, and so do you really mean the best interest of others, or do you mean the best interest of me? Because that's really what it comes down to. Is like the best interest for others is when you're, in a pickup basketball game and you suck. The best interest for others is for you to stay off the court.
Hey, that's true to my heart, man. I've always been the short guy, and typically I get kicked out eventually because I suck at basketball.
So that's the best interest of others. But when the guy who's in charge says, no, you suck, you can't play, you'll just wreck the game for the rest of us.
Yep.
You can't get mad because he made the decision as a good leader in the best interest of others.
Yeah.
It just happened to be that it didn't work out in your best interest.
Yeah.
And no, I think it would be fair if everybody could play. No, because people who have learned how to play basketball well want to be able to play basketball. And so it's not in their best interest for you to play.
Yeah.
And there is no compromise that's going to make that work. And so that's the sort of philosophy that you have to keep in mind when it comes to the idea of all this, of talking about authority. Are you ready? Are you really ready to accept what is in the best interest of everyone and not just yourself?
Okay, quick question. I'm going to ask another question to the audience. What does it mean to be submitted under authority?
Well, we kind of already have started talking about that. The idea of being submitted to authority is letting...
Don't go too far. Just
I haven't even said anything yet.
I know, but I know the way you talk. I know the way you think. Your mind will drive, and I know you'll do it. Very, very simple. Well, let me just ask the question to the audience real quick.
Okay.
What is a situation, and we can just, let's be, I've heard this in so many meetings. This is a safe place. I know it's a public forum, but this is a safe place. So let me.
There is no safe.
No. Hold on. I'm trying to encourage something here. So just be open. I'm telling you, this is personal experience. If you can experience even the smallest amount of breakthrough in this, you will rejoice. You will be a very, very content and happy person. It will be a source of joy for you for the rest of your life. And like Pastor Ford said, if we can all get this revelation, I don't say that pridefully. I mean that genuinely humbly. I've had a big problem with authority for a very, very long time, but there is a revelation to catch. That's the point. And so if you can answer this question, what are situations in your mind that you could be justified in not submitting under authority? Just give me any situation. It can be personal. It can be, and this is coming out of your heart. So it can be personal. It can be, whatever.
I have a suggestion here because nobody's going to answer that.
I think a few would.
No, well, if they did, it would probably be people who have already, that it's not a problem for them anymore. They're just giving a hypothetical, thing that's not a problem for them anymore. But because the truth of the matter is I think a better way of saying it is, where do you have a problem submitting to authority? And that would be a better way of asking the question. What are some areas where you have a problem submitting to authority? And then maybe we can work through those, and we can help you to
fair enough.
To work through that, because I think that would be a better way of thinking about it, because we all know that we're supposed to be submitted to authority. We don't all do it, and we just pretend that we are. And that's the problem, is that we pretend that we're submitted, and even though we're not submitted, we know we're not submitted. We pretend like we are submitted. That's the whole thing. The heart's deceitful, wicked thing, is that which is scary to me, because we're going to stand before Jesus, and all the lies are going to go away, and all that's going to be left is the truth. And we're going to have to face it then. We might as well face it now. And that's really what I'm kind of getting at, is that, that idea of facing it now. What are some things? What are some issues? Because everybody has an issue with authority. I've had issues with authority. I've had to deal with them. I've had to deal with those issues and understand, because there are times, I'll leave that. I won't go into that thing I was just going to say, because I'll leave that and then I'll mention it later on.
Okay.
You can remind me of it. I have it marked, if it doesn't come up by somebody else's question. But I imagine it will come up from somebody else, if they probably from everybody, honestly, if they thought about it. But anyway, let me try to rewind and get back on track of my thinking here. I was going to say something.
Okay. So we have I'm gonna take a note here. Anecdotal from Pastor Ford. There you go. Of a time you had a problem with authority.
Yeah.
Okay. I just had to deal with a problem with authority yesterday. I'm the one sitting here saying, it's quick.
Yeah, it does. The truth is that for people who are struggling with issues of authority, being under authority, it does get, as you deal with it, if you deal with it and you keep your heart's right, it does get easier over time to become submitted, because the benefits that you reap from being under authority are worth it.
Okay, let's jump on that real quick.
Okay.
The benefits.
All right.
The benefits of being submitted under authority.
Okay.
What are they?
So here's the thing, is that there's a sort of, I'm sure there's others who could probably come up with a better way of describing this, but there's this sort of congratulatory mechanism inside of us. And what I'm talking about is a thing that pats us on the back for doing certain things. It's a self-esteem boost, and it's a healthy thing. It's not an unhealthy thing. It's a healthy thing. And when you learn how to do hard things, that triggers. And it's more than just dopamine. I mean, there is a dopamine thing involved in that, but it's more than just dopamine. It's a self-esteem issue. It makes you feel good about yourself. And when you are able to submit to authority, you trigger that mechanism, and you have this sort of sense of being bigger, and not being bigger than other people, but being bigger than you were before, of just being bigger, that you've gone up a notch. And submitting to it, there are many things as a Christian, that as you do them, they are paradoxical in the world. But the reason is because in the world, people are in a constant struggle for, it's funny, they just bing, these things pop into my mind. It's a constant struggle for a sense of worth, and so when you don't have a good sense of self-worth, then you attack authority.
Yeah.
You know, and because you believe that authority is the one who's taking away your sense of self-worth. And then so you attack them, and then your self-worth goes down because you know you shouldn't be doing that, but you're doing it anyway. And so and you can get into this downward spiral of you know, with your own sense of self-worth. So anything that can turn that around, anything that either can stop that or can turn it around so that you're moving in a direction of an increasing sense of self-worth and value, you want to keep doing that thing. And that happens when it comes to submitting to authority, even bad authority. And I'll leave that because I don't know if anybody actually answered that question or not about good or bad authority that you haven't talked about yet. But you don't. It doesn't matter anymore.
I'm sorry. Which question are you referring to?
You mentioned to people what is good authority and what is bad authority in the beginning.
Oh, I said, what's the difference between good and bad?
Yes.
Yeah. So those were answered.
And we've already talked about it.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
All right. So I'll say it then. So even if you're under bad authority, you know, and you make that decision, you know, to be submitted to them. There's something that happens inside of you that, like I said, that sense of being bigger, that sense of having grown. You realize this is the right thing to do, you know, for me. Not just this is the right thing to do for God, but this is the right thing to do for me. This is part of the process of becoming a better human being, is being able to submit to authority. And people that don't submit to authority never grow. They always stay childish in their behavior, and that's why you can have people that they're 30 or 40 years old, and they are, you know, throwing little temper tantrums like 15-year-olds do, you know, because they don't have a self-esteem to protect. You know, when you're 30 years old, you go, man, I can't act like that. That would just make me look stupid. Well, but you don't have that because you don't have that self-esteem. And so you just do stupid stuff because who cares? You know, nobody respects me anyway. And so you have that problem, you know, but when you are able to capture something that, like what I just described, makes you feel bigger, you can trigger a momentum, and you want to do more things like that. And that's what I found when I got saved, you know, because I didn't have self-esteem. I'd lost my self-esteem when I got saved because I was getting good grades in school, and I was planning on going to college and then eventually to university, and I was going to become an electrical engineer, and I had my whole future planned out. I was going to get married, I was going to have kids, I was going to have a family, and it was all going to work. You know, and I was quite confident that was going to be the case. And so I stayed away from drugs. I stayed away from alcohol. I had a few moments of temptation when I was 16. Got really, really drunk and got so sick. That was enough to keep me away from it for quite a number of years. I don't think I started actually drinking again until I was 19 or something. And no, it was just before I was 19, so I was 18. And the reason I know is because I made a fake ID. I got arrested. And but anyway,
You made a fake ID?
well, back then it was much easier. Yeah, you just changed your driver's license so that your driver's license said you were older than you really were.
Okay.
You used to be able to use a piece of rolling paper. You'd take a rolling paper and just put it on there, and then it would just dry and turn white. And then you could just, you know, if you're very careful, you just write your new a date, you know, so like, you know, instead of, for me, 1962, I changed it to like 1960. You know, so I made the 2 into a 0.
Wow.
And then you put it into the sleeve of your I can tell this now because it doesn't work anymore. You put it in a sleeve of your wallet, and then when you go to bars or something like that, you just show it.
Yeah.
And they don't care anyway.
Yeah.
You know, so it's not, you know, they just need to see it so they can let you in. And so they look and go, oh yeah, okay. Even, I mean, it could be written in crayon and they probably let you in. But anyway, so I had my life planned out. I knew what I was going to do. But then I got involved in drugs, you know, and it was a moment of anger and frustration and weakness. And I said, you know what do I care? I'm going to try, you know, I'm going to try it, you know. And so I started smoking pot, and I really liked it. I immediately fell in love with it because it the issue of self-esteem went away. This is the scary part about, people smoking pot, is that when you smoke pot, you don't care. It's not that you feel better about yourself. You don't care. But not caring makes you feel better about yourself.
Yeah.
Than you did
you don't
before.
care.
Because you don't care.
Care.
Yeah. Before you cared.
Yeah, yeah.
You cared and you weren't getting anywhere.
Yeah.
But now you don't care, so you're actually moving up. And that's the dangerous part. And so I fell in love with it, and it was like, I like this. I can abuse people. I can kick people to the curb. I don't have to worry about my feelings or anything like that. I can just go do horrible things and not worry about it.
Yeah.
And the drinking and everything else. And so that's the road I went on, which didn't lead anywhere. I lost my job. I lost my future. Everything just was kind of devolving into partying and everything. And I looked at my life and I thought, you suck. What is the point of you even being here? I never had suicidal thoughts, but I would always was self-condemning, and I didn't care. And so I did stupid stuff. I was at a concert and I climbed up. I couldn't see, so I climbed up on top of the speaker stack and sat, on the stage, on the speaker stack, watching the concert.
It's a real life Zacchaeus.
And yeah,
Very good.
yeah, a weird Zacchaeus for sure. But and I didn't care, and I sat there, and the bouncers for the bar, they didn't bother. I wasn't doing anything crazy. I was just sitting because I wanted to see, and so I was just sitting up there drinking, and they didn't bother me, and so. But that was me, I didn't think about what I was doing in terms of how are people going to think of me. That was long gone, and so all that started happening. So when I got saved, that was it. I was like, for me, getting saved was like, I might as well, because it can only get better. It can't get worse. It can only get better. And the hope that God was real was that was a very strong element. It was like, if God really is real, then at least I can avoid going to hell. I may not have much of a life, but at least I won't go to hell.
So you're very interesting. You're talking about this issue of self-esteem. That's I actually didn't even consider that in this at all. But the idea of how you feel about yourself really does make quite a bit.
Oh,
of difference,
everything.
doesn't
It is everything. That's why, because when you have a good handle on who you are, you can take anything from anybody.
Yeah.
Dang.
Yeah, I'm thinking about the story of, I was going to use this scripture, and I was going to put it down just in case it came up, but the idea of what Jesus, and we're going to get to some of these answers here, but when Jesus is before Pilate, he's about to be crucified. He knows it.
Yeah.
He knows he's going to be crucified.
Yeah.
And the question of authority comes up between him and Pilate. He goes, I have authority to release you or to turn you over to the executioner.
Yeah.
And he says, you have no authority over me except that which has been given you from above.
Yeah.
And so Jesus obviously is very confident in his position.
Yes, absolutely.
And he even asks him, "Are you a king?" And he says, "Yes, I am. For this reason I came."
Yeah.
What confidence?
Yeah.
And, I mean, I've always been impressed by that.
Yeah.
Jesus.
I know who I am.
Yeah.
And see, and that's the thing is that, and he's in front of so somebody, if you now just move Jesus out of the way and then put somebody in there that has no self-esteem.
Yeah.
You're a jerk. You're a tyrant. You think you've got all this power. What kind of a person are you?
Yeah.
And
Peter did that, didn't he? He pulled his sword out and tried
Yeah.
to kill the guy.
Well, that was the servant. That was another story.
But still, they're going to exercise authority over him. And
Yeah. But my point in all that is you're not swapping Pontius Pilate out for a better leader.
Yeah.
You're swapping out somebody who has poor character in front of a leader who is just who he is.
Yeah.
Flaws and all. Jesus can manage that. And this guy's trying to get Jesus off the whole time.
Yeah.
But he can't, because he knows he's going to get killed if he does. And, he does the whole symbolic washing his hands and everything. But he doesn't, this is not his will for Jesus to die. And it's because of how Jesus responded. He said, I find no fault in this man. In other words, he's looking at him saying, I've never met a man like this, is really what he's saying. And, but he understands, his limitations. But that's the thing is that you can be, when you know who you are in God, and that's why there's no excuse for not being submitted to authority. Is because the problem of submission really is your problem. It is not the person who's over you. You look at David's a good example of this. We talk about it almost every time we talk about this because it's such a perfect example. Because I don't think you could have a worse leader over a better man.
Yeah.
And
I mean, he's a spiritual leader too. He's not even just a secular leader. He's God put him in place
there. Yeah, God put him there. And yet David was able to survive. And even though it got crazy, I mean, he actually goes over and joins the Philistines and starts fighting against Israel, but because he's running for his life and he's losing his mind. He knows he's losing his mind. But, who wouldn't lose their mind under such extreme circumstances?
Yeah.
And so, but David is not. We don't look at David, well, if you do, you're wrong, but when we look at David through the scriptures, we see that God has no problem with the things David's doing. He has no problem with the decisions he's making. He's not looking at the decisions that David is making during that period of time. He's not looking at those decisions going, no, David, that was stupid. You shouldn't have done that. No, you shouldn't. No, you shouldn't have joined the Philistines. No, you shouldn't have been fighting against Israel with the Philistines. No, you shouldn't have tried to find refuge in Gath. There's no rebuke for any of that. There's never been a rebuke. Never backwards or forwards. You can look and you can see there's no rebuke for any of the things that he did when he was under the leadership of Saul. And yet this is the worst king. I mean, he's the first king, but he's also the worst leader that anybody could ever be under. But yet he was able to go through it and come out golden. I mean, he was able to come out and still enter his destiny. Where others will use their leader, that authority over them, as the reason why they aren't where they should be. Mm-hmm. And that's the real problem with not being submitted to authority, is that you have no destiny anymore. Mm-hmm. Because you aren't developing the character that you need for destiny. That's another thing that it's not as important as the first thing of understanding the value of being under authority, but to understand that authority is the tool that God uses to shape our lives. And it doesn't matter whether it's a good tool or a bad tool. It's in God's hands. The old saying, a bad worker blames his tools.
Yeah.
Well, and we people who are really good at guitar, they can play the crappiest guitar.
Yeah.
Well, God can use the crappiest man to still do his will.
Yeah.
And so that's never an excuse. But when we are not entering into our destiny and we're blaming and we're poking our finger at somebody and saying it's because of them or this authority that's over my life, you're never going to get out of that. It's going to be a self-fulfilling prophecy.
Yeah.
I'm never going to be what God wants me to be as long as I'm under this man. You're right. You're never going to be what God wants you to be as long as you're under this man, because you will not let God use him as the tool to shape you so that you can be what he wants you to be. And that's why. Because if God put you under a different person, a different tool, he couldn't use that tool on you.
Don't go too far down that yet. That's kind of tail end. So we're at 7:43. I want to be conscious of the answers here, but the answers to the questions of name times that you had a problem with authority or issues that you've had with authority. And the first one was, I'm triggered now.
Awesome.
Okay, another one, whenever I disagree. And here's another one, when I think I have a better idea.
Okay.
Okay.
These are honest ones, and I like them, but they are just being honest.
Yeah, and here's an answer to my first question. I'm thinking of an exception to not submitting to authority is when you're asked to do something that you know is inappropriate or morally wrong, and then later on, same individual says, what about when the authority is telling you to do something or say something is clearly wrong, like for an example, or like lying for an example. This happens a lot on my job.
Right. So you don't stop submitting to authority. If your friend, if your peer, let's put it that way, your peer, your equal said to you, hey, listen, bro, I just need you to lie for me about this. You go, no, sorry, ain't going to do it, idiot. When What do you think I am? You know, and that would be our approach to it. I mean, maybe we'd be a little bit more respectful. It depends on you know who you are. I tend to give these kind of scenarios to give them understanding. I embellish them a little bit, but the idea is that your peers, you know, no, I'm not going to do it. But now your boss, you don't just go, no, I'm not going to do that. You know, with your boss, you say, listen, I understand what you're thinking here, and I understand why you're doing what you're doing, but my integrity will not allow me to do that. You're going to have, and I've been in that circumstance. I've specifically been in that circumstance. I used to work for a computer company when I was in Liverpool that I didn't know the people. I was working in one, and then I moved over to this other. And while I was there, I didn't know anything about it. I just knew that I had an opportunity to work there, and where I was working wasn't working out. And so I don't want to get too sidetracked with all that, but I went to this place. And because I had a reputation, it was a village. It wasn't, like a big city. It was a village, and I had a reputation. I was the American guy who fixes everybody's computer, and so when I had this issue, the owner of the business, well, his daughter became a Christian. I'm her pastor. He doesn't want her to have anything to do with me. So he says, either this is the way things are going to be, or you're out of here. And I respectfully told him, being a man under authority, it's not going to be like that. If she wants to talk to me, I'm still going to talk to her, because this is more important than just simply religion. This isn't religion. This is about eternity. And, tried to explain to him. The whole thing got ugly. I said, if you'd like, I'll leave, and so he was like, I don't care what you do. And so I went to this other shop, and immediately they picked me up. I didn't know anything about them, and I started working for them. And almost right away, I realized this is going to be difficult, because the owner, he lied to stay in business. I mean, and he didn't stay in business. But that was how he functioned. He functioned by lying. A customer would come in, yeah, we can do this, and even if we couldn't, we can do this, and then try to sell them something else, or try to bait and switch and things like that. And so, so there was a call of somebody who got, things fell through the cracks. And so he told me to call this customer and tell them that a lie, that something happened, we're waiting for a part that hasn't come in yet, and it'll be another week, and we're sorry, there's nothing we can do about it because it's the vendor, not us. And I said, no, I'm not sorry. I said, I'm not going to do that. I said, number one, I said, I'm a pastor of a church. I said, I'm not going to do that. I said, but I will stay out of this. Because I was working with the customer, and so I said, I'll stay out of this. You want to blame me, and you want to make me look bad, and you want to say it was all my fault. That's on you. You can call her and blame me and tell them it's all me or whatever. I said, but I'm not going to call them and lie for you. But I did it respectfully. And he told me, he said, no, that's cool. He said, I'll call her and I'll lie to her.
Yeah.
So.
At least he was honest.
Yeah. And so he didn't actually tell me he was going to lie to her. He just said, I'll call her.
Okay.
And I knew that's what that meant,
Yeah.
And so you don't have to. So you have to be careful of this bravado sort of a thing of, I'm going to, for righteousness' sake, I'm going to come out from underneath authority. That's not how there's never a place where you come out from underneath authority. Even David, you see David and you see the things that David did. David's fighting against Israel.
Yeah.
He's obviously fighting against Saul's army, but he's fighting against Saul's army as a part of the army of the Philistines. He's changed sides, but you see what I'm saying is there's still, he's not trying to kill Saul. He's not looking for the opportunity to avenge himself, by doing this. He's doing this because he's a warrior. That's David. He's a warrior. He's got to go break things and kill people. That's what he does for existence.
I'm trying to get clarity on one of these questions here. So, I'm just going to say your name, Anthony. Can you clarify your answer so I understand what it is you were trying to say there? So another one. Okay, this is the same person that said, whenever I disagree, says, but more specifically, when I think the correction coming from the authority is misguided or
bing,
straight
bing,
up
bing, bing,
wrong
bing.
because they don't understand.
That's the one. That's the one that I was going to mention earlier.
Okay.
And so that's why I wanted to kind of wait and see if it
Oh,
came
hey,
out.
this is the perfect segue. Then
Yeah.
you could just go ahead and share
Yeah,
your
that's
anecdote.
exactly what I wanted to say, because this is where that thing about feeling bigger takes a giant leap. Is that when you are, and there's even a scripture in the Bible for it, when you are, the actual King James, I believe it says, when you are buffeted for your faults, when you are buffeted, and he says when you're buffeted for your faults, what big deal is it? But when you take it, it's not your fault, and you take it. It's 2 Peter, I think it's either 2 Peter 2,
20,
1 Peter 2,
2:20, yep.
yeah.
1 Peter.
1 Peter
2:20. It's in my notes.
I always get because it's a 1 and a 2 and a,
Yeah.
I always get those numbers
Yes,
mixed
yep,
up.
so do
But
I.
anyway, in that scenario, when you have been wrongly, you've been mistreated, you've been misunderstood, all the information's not been there, and you've been raked over the coals. The Bible says, if you take it with patience. Is that the scripture you have?
Yeah. It
Okay.
says, for what glory is it if when you are buffeted for your faults, you shall take it patiently. But if when you do well and suffer for it, you take it patiently, this is acceptable with God.
Okay, so that's the idea, but that don't misunderstand that. It's not God going, yeah, well, you're doing what you're supposed to be doing. The idea of it being acceptable to God, this means God's looking down and saying, I accept it.
Yeah.
I accept that.
Yeah.
He is standing on that. And when you can do that, so there's so much that happens inside of you when you have been falsely accused, you haven't defended yourself, you've tried to to throw in the pieces of information to try to clear your name, and it's not working, and you just say, okay, listen, I'm sorry, that things played out the way they did. It was not, I don't feel it was exactly the same, but okay, I get what you're saying, and yeah, and I'll do better the next time, whatever it is. When you can walk away from that without all the painful feelings, when you can just let all that go, and you can be, the idea is being bigger than that. But when you can do that, you do get bigger. I mean, you literally do get bigger. You are bigger than you were before because you're doing something you couldn't do before. One of the cool things for me of getting saved, more than many, many things, there's a lot of things. I'm glad I'm going to heaven. I'm glad that I'm saved. I'm glad that Jesus Christ has paid for my sins. I'm glad for all those things. But at a more personal level, one of the things I am the most grateful for is that God opened my eyes so that I could become a better person in my own eyes. Not a fake person, not disingenuous. I'm talking about to become a real person, that I can look myself in the mirror and I can be happy with everything that I see. That's a very rare thing without God. It's very, very rare that people can do that, because we're always, there's always those little skeletons in the closet and stuff. But to be able to be that transparent, that open, and like what you read there in 1 Peter, taking it patiently, you will have an out of body experience, and you will look back at yourself and go, dude, I didn't know you had that in you. That was awesome.
Yeah.
That's how it feels. That's what happens inside. Your self-esteem goes through the roof, and it's like, you know what? I don't even care what happened back there, because the fact that happened is the reason why I feel the way that I feel now. The reason why I have this boost of confidence is because I made it through that without, ripping into my boss and losing my job for the 15th time. Mm-hmm. So.
Yeah, so a couple more answers here, and then we'll kind of gear into some close-up thoughts here. But the clarification on that answer was the same as what you just answered. So okay. He said, I don't have to treat people that offend me with respect, care, concern, and love. So that was the answer to the question I asked the authority.
Wait, I don't.
Yeah, so they're saying that's their attitude towards authority. When somebody doesn't respect them, or when somebody offends them, they don't have to respect them, care for them, concern, and love them as an authority.
Which is not true.
Right.
Okay.
So what they're saying is that was their problem with authority.
Right. Yeah. And so that is a big problem, because You again, if we keep this in that context, like what I've been talking about, when somebody doesn't care about you and you don't care about them back, that doesn't do you any favors.
Yeah.
You still don't feel better about yourself. You may not feel as bad about yourself because of what they say, but you will still feel bad about yourself about what you say about somebody else,
Yeah.
because it's not the right way to be. And so you will carry that around, I don't care. But inside you're the better part of you is going to be saying, but you should care.
Yeah.
You should care. You should be respectful, because you want people to be respectful of you. How can you expect other people to be respectful of you if you're not respectful of other people? And it doesn't matter who goes first. And that's another part of this that needs to be understood. Is it's not about who goes first. It's if somebody doesn't respect you and you don't respect them back, it's the same as if you walked up to them and didn't respect them from the beginning. There's no difference.
Yeah.
Because it doesn't matter that they don't respect you. We don't compartmentalize like that. It's like, they don't respect me, so I don't respect them. No, what we say is there are some people I don't have to respect.
Yeah.
And so you may see somebody who's doing something that you don't like, and you won't respect them either, because you think it's okay, to disrespect people. And so you just open that Pandora's box of people that you dislike.
Yeah.
And what you'll find is you'll get to a point to where you just don't like people at all.
Yeah.
Because nobody's giving you the respect that you want. Because you've narrowed yourself. When we make those kinds of decisions, we're narrowing our life. We keep narrowing and narrowing and narrowing and narrowing, and there's not much to us anymore. And so then we meet other people for the first time, and they meet us, and that's probably the last time we'll meet them. They'll avoid us because we're so narrow and so shallow and so stuck in our own way of thinking that there's no way for a new person to get into our lives, because we've become such a small package. We're just wrapped up in ourselves. And so, but that's where that starts, because you have to, to have lots of friends, you got to have lots of forgiveness. You've got to have lots of grace. You've got to have lots of understanding.
Tons of patience.
Patience. All of those things are required. So if you're stripping people from that, how are you practicing patience? How are you practicing tolerance? How are you practicing humility? How are you practicing this if you're stripping everybody of the right to be able to say stupid things to you?
Yeah.
So those things aren't there.
Yeah.
And that's, Bible says, add to your faith virtue and this and that and the other thing, and it's adding these things. When you read that list of all these things, it's like, well, there are so many things you have to endure.
Yeah.
In order to be able to make it through those things. Brotherly kindness, that means you've got to get brotherly beat up.
Yeah.
In order to learn brotherly kindness,
Yeah.
because you're not going to learn brotherly kindness by meeting your twin.
Yeah, exactly.
It's gonna be through meeting other people that are not like you or that don't agree with you.
Yeah. Yeah, so that I had this in my notes, 1 Peter, right before the portion you read, he actually says it exactly like this: submit yourselves for the Lord's sake to every human institution, whether the king is supreme authority, or to governors as those sent by him to punish those who do wrong and praise those who do right.
Yeah.
And so then he follows on with what Pastor Ford was talking about. And so that, interesting, you see this in the Old Testament as perfectly illustrated, because the Bible in Habakkuk says God raised up Babylon to sweep through. He says that ruthless and impetuous people who sweep across the whole earth to seize dwellings not their own, clearly not righteous. Yeah. But God said, I raised them up.
Right, yeah.
And so when we resist authorities, even that are clearly not righteous, God's saying, I'm the one that put them in place. So technically, this idea of submitting yourself for the Lord's sake, and this is actually where the revelation came to me personally, was I got a right understanding of God as the ultimate authority. Yeah. And if God was the ultimate authority, then everything that happened underneath that was in his control, right? Yeah. And so
that is the issue, is that what happens to people who come out from underneath authority, they also come out from underneath. You mentioned in your sermon that the farther you are from God, the smaller God is.
Yeah.
And that happens. So God wants us to submit to all authorities. No, I'm not going to do that because these are horrible authorities. They're unrighteous, and so I'm not doing that. Okay, you've just become a smaller person.
Yeah.
And then you take another thing, whatever. And so you're all these things that God says, no, you need to do this. And you're getting smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller. But really what's happening is you're getting farther and farther and farther and farther away from God.
Yeah.
And so you're looking, and then it's like, God can't, he can't help me in this.
Yeah.
This is, what good is the Bible in this circumstance? This is not, I can't. If I do what the Bible says in this circumstance, I'll lose my job. I'll lose money. I won't prosper. My life will take a bad turn. If I do that, and that's because of all these other decisions to come out from underneath other authority, and then ultimately you come out from underneath God's authority, because you, like you said, they're all related to each other.
Yeah. Okay, so another answer here. I'm actually not sure if this is a joke or if it's serious, but I'm going to read it. This is the answer to the question of a time they had a problem with authority.
Okay.
When I was gunned down by the popo for matching a description that they received, and I matched the description, but instead of getting mad and resisting, I responded to the incident because it was easier that way, how I felt when confronted with bad authority.
Yeah, dying does have a way of bringing sobriety.
Getting shot will make you submit real quick. Another follow-up, same person. When I hear something that relates to me, an issue that I might be going through, but hearing it from somebody else triggers a false emotion.
Well, I wouldn't say it's a false emotion. You have to be honest about how these things all work. It's not a false, it's a genuine emotion. I mean, that's a thing that you have to understand, is that things will trigger emotion in us, and the emotion isn't illegitimate. The problem is it's always overblown. It always goes too far, and that's the issue. It's not, I mean, you should, when somebody, rakes your name over the coals, you should feel offended. You should feel that, this ain't right. What's happening here. There should be something inside of you that gets gutted. I mean, I've been a pastor for 40 years or 30 years and been a Christian for 40 years. And there are still times where, I will, because I refuse to withdraw trust from people. So I trust and I get burned. And I trust and get burned, and it still makes me feel bad. I still think, this is not right, that you did this. I mean, all the things that I did to help you and how you repay me by this, or saying things like, you never helped me. You never have done a thing for me, ever. And it's like, excuse me, you're alive today because I helped you. Do you not remember when I pulled you out of the ocean? You were drowning and I pulled you out of the ocean. No, you didn't. I would have been fine if you hadn't helped me. I'd have been okay. No, you were going under and there was no way you were going to survive. I gave you mouth to mouth. You were going to die. No, you never did any such thing.
I mean, other than the mouth to mouth, I think you and I have had a very similar conversation to this.
But that's that, and it's like, in the middle of that, it's like,
yeah.
Very, very, very emotional. But you have to stay true to your integrity. That's the key, is you have to stay true to your integrity. You cannot sacrifice yourself on the altar of your emotions.
Yeah.
You have to say, you know what? I'm still going to be me. No matter what you do, no matter what you say, I'm going to still be the same me. I'm not going to change me. And that's what happens is, like when somebody disses you like that and you turn and you say, okay, well, screw you. You're changing. You have changed now. And then you've changed in a bad way. But when you say, no, you know what? You can say whatever you want. I'm going to stay me. I'm not going to change. I'm going to stay me. I'm still going to love you. I'm going to pray for you. I'm going to believe God to help you. I am not going to change just because you have changed, because you have gone down this dark road. I'm not going down that dark road. I'm not going to do it. And you You walk it, but you walk it alone. I'm not going with you. And the emotions go away. They subside. Emotions are they're fast reactive, and they're also fast recessive, to go back to where it was before. Your body, my daughter Clarissa, I don't know if she's listening or not, but she'll love the word I'm going to use, because she uses a lot. Homeostasis. Everything wants to come back. Everything wants to come back. And so when you just put the brakes on your emotions and say, I'm not going to let that change, it'll calm down, and everything will come back up to normal, and you'll be fine. They won't be. They'll be jacked up, but you'll be fine. And that's and you can't, in those kinds of moments, you can't do anything for that other person. You can't, until you have come back to normal. Once you've come back to normal, then you're in a position to where, if that person ever regains sanity, they'll come back. They will come back, and they may not apologize, but they will come back. They will come back. Mm-hmm. And I've seen it happen. Not a lot, because I would say that it's probably, the amount of people that have done things to me that have not said anything, that's up here, and the ones that have come back and said, I'm really sorry, I've learned my lesson, that was a stupid thing to say, it's down here. That's okay. All these people, I still have hope that one day they'll join this group over here, and God can do something in their lives. It's a better way of being. It's just a better way of being. It's a much more. You just are bigger. You're a bigger person. That's all there is to it. When you have to, when you have to, attack and use your mouth and use your fists and things like that, when it's all said and done, you always feel smaller. You never feel bigger. You always feel smaller.
So let's talk, because we've only got about 20 more minutes here, but let's talk about like a couple of the realities of people in authority. And it's interesting, because this came out in this story about the 10 minus when I was reading through it. But God obviously gave them the authority, and within their hands is a very realistic authority. When Pilate said, I have the power to release you, or the power to deliver you over.
Yes.
That was real. He really did have that power.
He did.
And Jesus gave him a perspective of that. That was given to you by somebody else.
Right.
Keep that in mind.
Yeah.
But then you read this story, and so the story, and I'll just summarize it. You guys can read it on your own time. It's in Matthew 25. Is a similar parable. They're actually two different parables, two different times, two different locations, but Jesus says almost exactly the same thing in both parables. And he's talking about a master who left. He gave his servants money. He said, do business with this while I'm away. He leaves. He comes back. A couple of them did something with the money. They put it to work and made more. Yeah. And he tells them, well done, thou good and faithful servant. Right. I will make you, one guy gained 5 more. Yeah. He said, I'm going to make you ruler over 5 cities. Right. And in another parable, he says, I will make you, you've been faithful in few things. I will make you faithful over many things, or I'll make you rule over many things. Yeah. And so there's this reality that the people who have authority over us, like Peter says, to punish those who do wrong and to praise those who do good, that's part of the reality of authority. They have the power to both bless and curse. Right. And our response is what triggers that, right? In these examples that Jesus is saying, those
examples it does, but not always in life. Right, I mean, sometimes you're ill-treated by those who are in authority over you. Right. And so that's not the expectation, but that is the reality, is that we don't benefit at all ever if we just, rebel against authority when somebody's acting stupid. No, whether good or bad. Yeah. Yeah, whether good or bad.
And so there's this, what is the last kind of question is, what is always the right perspective to have with authority? Right off the bat, if you could communicate the revelation about authority.
Yeah, the first thought that comes to my mind, and letting it kind of roll around for a few nanoseconds, the issue really is, you will never have authority if you cannot come under authority. Never. You will never have authority. Because if you are ever given the opportunity to be in authority, you're going to be a tyrant. Mm-hmm. You're gonna wield an axe, and you're gonna hurt people, and you're gonna have to live with that. So if you ever get to the place to where you've snuck in to authority, you're not gonna just change and all of a sudden become a good person in authority. You'll be bad. You will hurt people, and you will see a side of yourself that you didn't even know existed. because you cannot resist authority and learn the principles of authority. You can't. You'll be a thug. You'll just get in there like what Saul was. Is you'll just be a thug. You'll go in. Anybody who gets in your way, you'll just take them out.
Yeah.
You'll just kick them to the curb. You won't have anybody's best interest in mind. It'll all be about your vision, your goal, your idea, and you want to make sure your idea comes to play. And so there'll be people that, they may give you a little hard time, or they may disagree, something like that. And you go, okay, you, out, get out. Okay. And then you'll grab a few other people. And then eventually all you'll have left is people who are scared to death to do anything. And you'll never be able to actually do anything. So you'll never have authority, not real authority. Mm-hmm. When you're like that. Authority, being submitted to authority is your ticket to authority, because you're not going to ever have authority in your life if you cannot submit to authority, because that's part of it. And it's not just using that authority as stepping stones. Somebody was telling me about a situation where there was a pastor that, and it sounded to me, okay, and some of this is third party, but I think it does illustrate the point still, even if some of the details are wrong. But they were a part of a church, the church organization that they were a part of, the church organization that they were a part of had decided that they were going to ordain homosexual bishops, which is unbiblical. Okay, there's no two ways about this. This is an unbiblical thing. And so the members of the congregation were not with this, and so they decided, one of them said, let's go start our own church. And so they did. So they didn't actually, confront, try to reconcile, and tell the leadership, listen, this is what's going to happen. We're going to leave, if this occurs. It was just, they just all of a sudden just pulled, and they're gone. And so that's what they decided. So they gathered together. And they started to meet. Well, somehow, and I'm not sure of the whole details of it, another of a similar background, so who decided they were going to leave this as well and not be for this ordaining, came. And so now you have two guys, and then there's a sort of leadership fight. And then some authority around that told the congregation, you guys decide who you want to be with. You decide, but it's one or the other. You guys decide. And so they all went with this new guy. And so the guy who rallied them to leave the church for the greater good, he's now left high and dry. And that's the point that I'm making, is that when you don't have a submission to authority, you don't have authority. And so people will follow you because they're rebels too. They'll follow you as long as you're doing what they want you to do. But as soon as you decide to turn around and go, okay, now it's time for us to put a leadership structure in place, they're going to go, oh, no, sorry. And they're going to go somewhere else because you don't have that. You don't have that. You haven't established that authority because you haven't gone through the channels of submission to authority. Now, this is what I explained. The individual told me about it. I said, now, if they would have gone, if he would have suggested, listen, let's go and let's talk to the leaders and say, listen, this is what, biblically we cannot connect with this. What is your suggestion here? Are you open to this, or is this a thing? It's just no, it's a done deal. You're like it or leave. And because if it is a thing of leave, we're going to leave, but we don't want to leave under, we don't want it to be this thing of where we just walk out in the middle of the night and take, 30 people with us, but this is what's going to happen. 30 people are going to leave your church. I'm just using that number arbitrarily, but 30 people are leaving your church. Do you still want to do this? And then if they say yes, okay, you've done what you could do, because this is a biblical issue and they're following a non-biblical issue. And that, so now you're not talking about a leader who's been put in place by God. You're talking about somebody who's stepped out from underneath that, So now you're no longer talking about that, because everywhere in the scriptures, the Bible is very clear that we are not under leadership that causes us to sin, And that actually was the problem with the children of Israel. The children of Israel, every king would lead them into sin, And so you have to, and then God would raise up somebody and things would turn around. And you look at a good example of the kind of thing that I'm talking about is, Jonathan is Saul's son and David, and Jonathan is submitted to Saul, but he says, I'm not the next king, David is. And that's all there's to it. It's going to be David. It's not going to be me. And Saul picks up a spear to kill his own son, but he's not saying, no, I'm going to join with David. We're going to join forces and we're going to take you out. It wasn't that kind of a thing. There was a no, this is God. You can see that this is what God's doing, just like God be God. And, no, I'm not having that. So they withdrew. But it wasn't a thing of where they're going to go off, because that's a thing that is where everything falls apart. You start, because what happens out of that, I'm sure if you were a fly on the wall, you'd probably hear about all the other evil things that were going on. And that is really just the process of justification at that point. And it's like, no, we left them and it was the right thing to do because, they're evil, wicked, horrible, terrible people. And, God would never want us to be under them, and seeing that's when now you've slipped over into the dark side. You've joined the dark side. But if you keep your heart right in all of that and you follow, the biblical patterns for reconciliation, and you're not able to have a reconciliation, then it needs to be something that becomes very clear. I don't want to go into the details of it because it'll take too long, but that's our fellowship went through that. It's the exact same thing. We had to come to some agreement because there was conflicts, like Abraham and Lot. There's too many animals for this little field. We have to go our separate ways. It's a requirement. It's necessary we go our separate ways. And he tells Lot, you choose. You choose which direction you want to go. I will go the other direction. And so these are the kinds of things that we need to develop in our character, of not just, like I mentioned, if it was us, we would have probably grabbed Saul in the cave, grabbed him by the face and slit his throat, and then dropped his body and said, I'm king, praise the Lord, and that, and feel justified at doing that. But yet, then we would proceed to slit a bunch of other throats. See, because it wouldn't stop with Saul, because anybody who gets in your way now is a target. And that's what I'm talking about, is that you can't become a leader if you do not know how to submit, especially if you don't know how to submit to a bad leader. Because what will happen is somebody won't submit to you and you'll have no sympathy for them whatsoever. None. Because you think you're the perfect leader.
That's actually that the scripture actually specifically says, when the master comes back and these two men, the two faithful servants in the scriptures, he says, your mina has produced 10 more, and his master replies, well done, good and faithful servant. You have been faithful in a very small matter. You shall have authority over 10 cities. And that literally is, he spells that out. But the other guy's like, no, you were a harsh man. I knew you to be a harsh man. So he knew I was a harsh man. You should have went to work.
The wise thing to do would have been to produce.
Clearly.
Not to not produce. If you think I'm going to kill you because you don't produce, and then you don't produce.
Yes. So, another comment here was, to lead, you must first be able to follow. That, I mean, in essence, that's what we're talking about, is because how can you teach somebody else? This is one of the things that within the church environment, to me, that makes no sense at all, of people who have these ambitions. They're wicked ambitions, but they have ambitions to lead, and they get ticked because they're not being given the opportunities. They're mad. They're literally mad. I should be leading. I have what it takes to lead. You don't get it. It's like, and what makes you think you have the credentials to lead when you're yelling at me, who is your leader? What makes you think you have credentials to lead? Because you don't know how to follow. So how can you? So if you're the leader, people are going to come to you and say, I want to follow. You're going to go, get away from me. What the heck? It's like, you're supposed to teach me how to follow. Well, following isn't even on your radar. How are you going to teach other people to follow? And so, there was a famous, I can't remember. I don't know who it said. Somebody can look it up. But a leader who has no followers is just a man going out for a walk. I know that one. Now I'm like stuck on it. I want to look it up. Okay, another question here. So, how would you advise someone who does develop some sort of problem with authority?
Listen to this podcast. It'll help you. I think we've kind of covered a lot of that.
Yeah.
And so I think, really just understanding it is in your best interest to let this process happen. It's in your best interest. You need to let this process happen in your life. You are going to have, I can guarantee you, if you are going to ever be a leader, you are going to cross paths with a leader who is going to challenge your ability to stay faithful. And you're gonna fight against it. You're gonna kick against it. You're gonna want to not be faithful. It's just the way that it works. And you have to accept that challenge at its face. You know what? Okay, yeah, okay. I'm gonna still stay faithful. Not become stupid, passive aggressive, and and always hinting and indicating that I'm being faithful. Just thought I'd let you know I'm being faithful, even though you're a jerk. It's not the same thing. Am I talking about something that I've experienced? Yes, I am. I mean, when you've pastored for 30 years in different countries, you meet all kinds.
You did tell your story, right?
Which one?
I had this down as your anecdote. You did tell.
Yeah, that was the one about the.
Okay.
Yeah.
I just want to make sure. Okay. The quote was by John Maxwell.
But I think he stole it from somebody else. But yeah, because he's a famous
So there's two
leader
people.
guy.
There's two people. John Bonner is another guy. I don't know either one of them. I mean, I know John Maxwell,
Yeah.
but
Yeah, John Maxwell's been around for a bit because I think he was a military guy, actually.
well,
But anyway,
yeah.
it's not that important.
8:20. I'm done.
Is everybody else done?
Are you guys done? Do you have any more questions? Oh, sorry. Is there a time? Is there ever a time where you should confront your authority, not confront aggressively?
Is that what it says? Not
Yeah,
confront aggressively?
Yeah, in parentheses.
We are, and I'm talking as a leader, one of the things that bothers me more than anything else is when people have a problem with me that they think it's okay to go tell other people about it. I mean, to me, that's the smallest thing that you can do is to have a problem with somebody, but be happy to discuss it in detail with somebody else and never discuss it with the person that you have the problem with. Because that's right across the board. I mean, it's a violation of Matthew chapter 18. Matthew chapter 18 says, if you have a problem with somebody, you need to go and you need to speak to them. And if they won't receive you, then you get two others. And if they won't receive you, then you tell it to the church. And if they still won't receive you, then you treat them as a heathen. In other words, if you've got a problem with me as your pastor, then you go and talk to me. And if you don't get anywhere with me because I'm just a pig-headed, selfish pig, you go find two more and you bring them as well. And if it's still the same, then you take it to the church, which would mean to take it to a leadership pastor or something like that. And then if I'm still not receptive of it, well, then more than likely if I'm in the wrong, the leadership is going to bring discipline on my life. And usually it doesn't work like that because most people. My experience has been is most people that have a problem with leadership, really their problem, they understand, they know that their problem is that they just don't like their leader. It's not what the leader is doing, that he's doing something wrong or sinful or anything like that. They just don't like it, and so they would rather just complain about it like the children of Israel. And that's why they'll go and talk to other people about it. Is because they're just they're just the same spirit as the children of Israel complaining against Moses. There's no difference between it. They don't like the style. They don't like the instructions that God has been giving, and they just want to they want to fight against it. But for me personally, there's nothing I like better than when people come and will say, "Hey, we need to talk," and they're able to listen, and they're able to hear, this is why, this is the issue. There's numbers of times where I've had run-ins with people, but a lot of it, almost I'd say 99% or probably maybe even 100% of the time, that it was a misunderstanding on their part of what I was doing. They just didn't understand. They didn't see the big picture. They only saw their part of the picture and thought this is what I was doing. It's like, no, you don't understand. There's this thing over here and that thing over there, and this, they just don't know. But if they would come and ask, then I could explain it and they would be able to see and understand. But that's often the case. Actually, before we close it up, let me throw this out there, because I
I
don't.
actually have
Hopefully,
one more question as well. So
okay.
you can,
Hopefully, we're not going to do a third anti-authority thing. I kind of done with the authority
yeah, no,
thing.
I think this is a
I
good
think we've
close-up.
beat this horse dead. And so,
I'm sure it'll come up
but
again in a year.
well, right, but like, because you had mentioned in a previous podcast, and it was mentioned to me by somebody else, because they heard the podcast and said, yeah. So when my son Elliot, when you earlier on, we should get lights, and we should do lights and lights and lights and lights and lights and lights, and I was like, no, we're not doing any
Yeah.
lights.
Yeah.
And then Elliot comes, and Elliot said, we should do lights, and I said, yeah. And it's like, oh, I see, favoritism. I got it. No, you don't need to explain anything. He's your son. And that's just the way things go. And, and I just have to submit, because it's leadership, and I just have to submit, But if you would have come and you would have said, so I asked you about doing lights, and you said no, but then Elliot came and asked about doing lights. Why did you let Elliot do it and not me? I would have been able to explain.
Mm-hmm.
Because the explanation is, you don't know anything about running lights. We would put in lights and I would run them.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't want another chore in church. And so that's why I did it. Elliot comes. I know how he is about these kinds of things. He's a lot like me. He's OCD. And not only is he going to do it, he's going to do it to the best of his ability, and he's going to stop sleeping until he's got it finished. And that's exactly what happened. And he did all the lights by himself. I didn't do anything, well, not by himself. He did all the programming of the lights by himself. He learned the program. He developed it. He did the whole thing. I put very little into it. In fact, and the reason why I'm mentioning this now is because it came into my memory. I was sitting over there praying, and the lights weren't on, and it was 10 o'clock in the morning. We're going to have service in 15 minutes, and nobody noticed that the lights weren't on, which is the responsibility of other people. Not my responsibility. It's the responsibility of other people, and they didn't even know. And so I thought, great, well, I'll just turn them on. And so I went to go turn them on, but they wouldn't come on. And here we are 15 minutes before service. And so I called Elliot, and I said, Elliot, is there any reason why the lights are not working right now? And he said, and he's on vacation. He's in another state. And he said to me, why, what isn't working? I said, well, the lights aren't on. And he said, well, can I log into it remotely? And I said, yeah, I've sent you all the information for that, because he said he wanted to do that when we were away, while he was away. And he said, okay, well, let me remote in right now, And so he remoted in right then, and then all of a sudden the lights came on. And he goes, how's that? He was texting me this stuff. And he says, how's that? Is it working now? And I said, yes, thank you. But that's the thing, is that I knew that by handing this project to Elliot, I knew how it would play out. It played out exactly the way that I expected it to play out. If I would have just gone on faith that it would play out that way with you, that would not have happened, because number one, you're not a tech, okay, first of all. And number two, experientially, that's been the case, is that, you learn how to do things, but you don't become OCD and do. And so I don't want that kind of headache. Let's use a light switch until the time comes that there's the technical ability for somebody to be able to do this otherwise. Mm-hmm. And that's it. And if you would have said that to me back then, and you would have understood, why I didn't want it. Or if you would have just simply asked, why, okay, so what's the deal behind the lights? What is it that you're interested or not interested in? Because I have hinted to this many, many times. I don't want another job. That's been my response to many of the improvements to church, is that let's do this. And it's like, I don't want another job, because the improvement is, Pastor, hey, I got a great idea. How about if you did this? That would be a wonderful idea. I think the church would really benefit if you would do this. And so that's, this is where a lot of people are when they see things, and they only see things from a distance, and they think they know everything that's going on, because they, for some reason, have got this idea in their mind that they can read other people's minds, they can see looks on people's faces and know exactly 100% everything that's going on. And they don't know anything. But if they would just ask, if they would just simply come and ask, and then be willing to listen to the answer.
Yeah.
A lot of these problems would go away, and the bad leaders, all of a sudden you'll realize they're not bad leaders. You're just a bad follower. you know. And when you learn how to be a good follower, it's surprising how all of a sudden leaders become a lot better magically. You know, Pontius Pilate magically became a great leader under Jesus, you know, or over Jesus.
So that actually is perfect for this last question. It's
Okay.
8:30,
Yeah.
8:29. But quickly, what does obedience really look like? Because the idea of submitting yourself, and Jesus says, you know, he makes it more. He kind of gives it a characteristic. He says, "You've been faithful
Yeah.
over small matters."
Right.
And then Peter says, "Submit yourself or be obedient to those in authority." And so what does submitting yourself look like? Is it like I'm just going to do what I'm told? Is that submitting under authority? Is that faithfulness?
No, that's what I'm talking about. The difference between and you just have to get this, you know, when I talk, and this is a thing I know a lot of people have a problem with. When I talk about things from a matter of fact point of view. I don't have any, you know, it's not like, and I hate you because of this. You know, it doesn't go there. And you're stupid because of this. It's not that kind of a thing. It's just the way things are. I know how Elliot, I've over the years, I've watched Elliot. I've watched him, how he takes on a project. He takes on a project. And the funny thing with Elliot is that when he takes on a project, he will make it work. He will make it happen. But he can be erratic and I don't want to do this, you know, and not want to do that or whatever. But once he sinks his teeth into something, I know it's going to get done. And it's going to be done in a way that's going to be all the details are going to be worked out. Whereas with you and not now that you're listening more, things have changed now that you've started listening to me. But when you were back in the rebel stage, it was like, I know you're just doing the minimum. You know, you're not putting your heart into any of this because your attitude is just like, oh, I don't know if I even want to do this because I know, you know, you don't like me. You're just going to get somebody else to do it anyway, you know, or whatever is going on inside your head. But, you know, so I'm looking at people and I'm looking at what are they, not how are they responding to me? What are they? Now, what they are may be greatly stunted because of how they feel about me, but I'm still just looking. Do they come of their own accord? Do they go beyond the minimum? Do they, you know, is their heart in this? You know, when things start falling apart, do they go, oh, not my fault?
Yeah.
Or do they go, no, okay, this is what happened and I should have fixed this. I should have dealt with this. And that's the thing, you know, like, you know, the idea of ownership is locked into that as well. We probably should maybe leave all these things for another time. But, you know, the idea of ownership isn't, this is mine, stay away. That's not ownership.
Yeah.
That's tyranny. That's not ownership. Ownership is taking responsibility. So when somebody else screws up your thing, you still take responsibility for it. That's ownership. Ownership is when you go, no. I knew that this was going on. I knew that these people were messing with some of the moving parts. I knew this and I didn't do anything about it. And so it's on me. You know, that's responsibility. Responsibility is not, oh, they touched it. You know, you're watching, oh no, somebody's doing that over there. I'm not responsible for that anymore because they're doing it.
Yeah.
You know, and it's like, but aren't you in charge of this? No, I am in charge of it. You're right. But you let so-and-so do such and such. And because you let so-and-so do such and such, I was no longer in charge anymore. And my answer to that is, why? You know, why are you no longer in charge? Why did you abandon your post? Mm-hmm. You know, why did you go AWOL? You're missing in action. You know, these are punishable offenses.
Yeah.
You know, no, it wasn't. No, because that's not faithfulness. So faithfulness is about you and your commitment. You know, and that is what it means to be submitted. Is that you know you've been given a charge and you will fulfill that charge at all cost. You will fulfill it. You're you know, the Bible says he who swears to his own hurt and does not change.
Yeah.
You know, so you say, I'm doing this, and even though this is gonna jack me up because there are other moving parts that other people are messing with, I'm taking responsibility for it.
Yeah. Very cool. All right. Well, 8:33. I know the 8:30 crowd is dying right now, but we're done. We can close up. We invite you guys to join us next week. We'll be here again. I know it's actually the day after Christmas, so yeah, I don't have I have a few topic ideas, but not anything specific to Christmas. But we will have service, midweek service tomorrow night. We encourage you to join. We'd really love to see you here. Come check out a service. Meet some folks in person, and honestly, let God speak to you. We'll be here in person. Like I said, the information will be on your screen in a second. And then as well, we are having a service in the morning and in the evening on Christmas Eve. We will be here. Encourage you to come join us for that as well. Send these links out to people you know. Invite folks to watch the podcast. Maybe have like a 7 o'clock tea time if you guys do that sort of thing. I know nobody really drinks coffee late at night, but invite folks out. We really encourage you to continue to be involved in these. Throw your questions in. Don't be shy. That's why we're here, and so we look forward to seeing everybody soon.